Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
When it comes to weight loss, no 2 people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
A Living History production.
I'm Matt McLachlan.
And I'm Pete Smith.
We're battlefield historians who love nothing better than getting out and walking the ground where great battles in history took place.
And now we'd like you to come with us. Every week, BattleWalks will take you to one of the great battlefields of Europe.
As we walk the ground, we'll dig through the pages of history. We'll uncover the secrets of the battlefields, and most importantly, we'll tell the stories of the people who fought and died there.
Welcome to BattleWalks.
Hello everyone, and welcome to BattleWalks, where we are walking the great battlefields of Europe. Well, a couple of departures this week from the normal episodes that we do, because firstly, Pete Smith, my co-host, is busy leading tours on the battlefields. So he is busy out there actually walking the ground with customers and doing what he loves, which is getting out, walking the ground and showing those battlefields off. So he is very busy at the moment and not finding time to enter the recording studio. So we have a special guest presenter, and I'm going to introduce him now. It's David Howell. Dave, thanks very much for joining us.
No worries. Thanks for having me on, Matt.
It's a real pleasure, mate, and this is a little bit different. I said that on BattleWalks we walk the great battlefields of Europe. Again, a departure, no Pete Smith, but also no Europe this time. We a couple of months ago, we did the battlefield of Guadalcanal in the Pacific, and it just demonstrated, that was one of our most popular episodes we've ever done, and it demonstrated that World War II and the Pacific War are hugely important to people and a great topic of interest. And so I wanted to revisit that. And you are one of the best people to revisit that with, because you are an absolute expert on Kokoda and the New Guinea campaign of the Second World War, which is what we're going to talk about today. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be this guru for all things Kokoda?
Well, I actually got into it by accident. I had been raised by my grandparents. My grandfather was a veteran of the fighting in Papua New Guinea, and he died when I was 16 when he passed away, and I hadn't really thought much of it since then, but I had gone and walked Kokoda, and I came back, had a good time, got to experience New Guinea, but I didn't really know a lot about the history. And it was through, I guess, walking, having in the back of my mind the stories that my grandfather had told me that got me involved with doing guiding at Concord, the old repatriation hospital in Sydney, and they have the Kokoda Track Memorial Walkway. And it was through that association that I met a generation that I'd lost contact with, i.e. my grandfather's generation, that we got to take school kids around the memorial. I got to reconnect with veterans, people of my grandfather's era. I understood their jokes, understood their stories of growing up in the Great Depression. And from there, I just started to immerse myself in the history. And then 62 treks across Kokoda later, countless interviews with veterans, countless immersion in this history. I guess here we are 80 years after the battle, and I've got a whole weight of knowledge behind me thanks to that generation of World War II vets.
And you worked at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne for a while as well, didn't you?
I did. After I moved away from Sydney, I came in and I was still thirsty to continue, guiding and taking people around war memorials, I guess. And I walked into the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, and what was going to be a volunteer job turned into a full-time job for 5 years, where I worked on the Galleries of Remembrance project, which prepared the National War Memorial of Victoria for the centenary commemorations.
And much like me, mate, you've been able to turn this passion/obsession into a career because you run a very successful company that guides people across Kokoda, don't you?
I do, and it was through these associations of meeting the veterans that I had the opportunity. This is going back to 2005, where I went back to New Guinea. I'd walked it the previous year, and this time when I went back, I didn't go back to walk it. I went back with veterans. We used helicopters and aircraft to try and get us out onto the battlefield, and we had this opportunity to connect with local people in the village, especially in the village of Kokoda. And I just happened to be there when one of the chaps that had walked with me the previous year was there. And that was the moment I thought, hey, with your ability to get people across the track and now my knowledge of the history, we could form a company. And that was 2005. And here we are, 2022. And as I said, 62 trips under my belt, plus countless people going to Kokoda, both on trekking and non-trekking, and to other unique places pertaining to Australian military history in Papua New Guinea.
Well, we don't just go out to Australians. We have a lot of international listeners, and I should say that to an Australian audience, the concept of walking the Kokoda Track is just a hallowed idea. We just know it inside and out. It's probably up there with Anzac Day at Gallipoli as the most iconic thing to do in the sphere of remembering the Anzacs. But we should give a little bit of an overview for our international visitors or international listeners about this concept of walking Kokoda, of hiking Kokoda. We're going to, in a minute, we're going to get into the history, and we're going to do over several episodes that we're going to break the track down and describe what it's like to do it. But just talk to us a little bit, David, about this concept of trekking Kokoda, why people do it, who does it, and what it means to your Australian clients.
I think for Australians, like Gallipoli, and a place to go for a pilgrimage to experience Anzac Day and to get closer to that our history, our wartime history, Kokoda has become a place that is also a focal point for that. But it has a unique crossover in the sense that, unlike being on a bus, unlike in my case when I first went to Gallipoli, being on a boat and arriving Anzac Cove, to get to a lot of these places along the Kokoda Track, you have to, unless you go over in a helicopter, you have to walk it, and it's a huge undertaking for most people. And a lot of people that go and trek it, camping, going out in the great outdoors, is not something that they do regularly. Sure, you get the people who do this as a hobby or an interest, and that's bushwalking and things like that. But for Kokoda to go and undertake this pilgrimage, you have to deprive yourself of not being able to lay on a lounge, not being able to go to the pub in the evening, all those sorts of things. So you are actually undertaking a true pilgrimage in the sense that through deprivation you're getting closer to to experiencing in a small way what the soldiers had done 80 years ago.
What's the typical length of a trek across Kokoda? In
terms of days, it's about 9 days of actual walking. is what the average group takes to walk the track. We're talking, they say 96 kilometres, but that's the way the crow flies. It's probably more like 130 kilometres. And, over 9 days, divided up to, walk. Some days it's easier than others because some days you're climbing quite high and dropping down to creeks and going back up again. And other days you're in the lower part where Kokoda is and you're spending time looking at the memorials and looking at plaques and where battles were fought. So it's got all the hallmarks of a great adventure, but also walking on hallowed ground to get closer to the Kokoda story.
I've heard it described as the world's toughest sea level trek. Would you agree with that assessment?
I guess for me, yes, but also I must say I've not really done a huge amount of trekking in places that otherwise wouldn't be an Australian battlefield. I know that people who come, because we do get people that come just simply to do the walk and they don't know a lot about the history. Hopefully at the end of it, that's my job to get them to know more about the history, but they come and do it because it's known as one of the great walks to do in the world.
It's we hear all of this about the physical challenge. Is it as daunting as people would make out?
I think sometimes people make it out to be much harder than what it actually is. I'm not suggesting that it's not hard, but what I would say, it's very achievable for even a person with just an average amount of fitness. With the right training, right preparation, and most importantly, the right mindset, it's something that, it's very achievable.
Well, this is we're going to make it extremely achievable today and over the next several episodes because we're going to walk it in a virtual sense. So I think why don't you give us if you can, just a potted history, David? I know Kokoda is a complicated campaign. There were many facets of it, and there was a lot going on, a lot of people involved. But can you give us just over a few minutes, just an overview of what was going on in New Guinea in 1942 that led to this fighting on the Kokoda Track?
Well, in essence, where the Kokoda Track is situated was in what was then known as the territory of Papua, Australia's nearest neighbour. The Japanese already had attempted to take the capital of PNG, which is Port Moresby. They attempted that with Operation MO. We know it as the Battle of the Coral Sea. That didn't work out well for the Japanese in trying to achieve their objective, that is the capture of Port Moresby. So the next step they did in order to be able to achieve that objective was to march on Port Moresby, if you will, by way of an overland track, which we now call the Kokoda Track, the Kokoda Trail. So, you have this, existing pathway because it was a mail routes that walked across. The Japanese had intelligence that they knew that there was a path from the northern beachheads across the mountain range into Port Moresby. So, they first attempted, as I said, by sea. Now they attempt to do it overland via the Kokoda Track.
And there's two really distinct phases of the campaign. I mean, I know that's broken down into dozens of different phases, but the two big distinct parts we look at is the Japanese advance and then the Australian sort of counter advance after that. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what the Japanese achieved and then what the Australians did in response?
Yeah, so the first phase was the Japanese had it landed on the north coast of Papua at a place called Basaboa near Buna in July of 1942, on the 21st of July. So they push all the way along the flat country, which is around about 100 kilometres to the village of Kokoda. And on the way, they're met by Papuan Infantry Battalion and Australian militia soldiers of the 39th Battalion. So these militia guys are not our Australian Imperial Force guys who are yet to join the battle, but they put up a good fight against the Japanese, but nonetheless they get pushed up into the mountains and they fight a series of fighting withdrawal actions at different places along the Kokoda Track as they keep getting pushed back until they're joined by the AIF. The Japanese continue to push the militia and the AIF back to the halfway point. They have another battle, they get pushed back again, and they're only 2 ridges away from being on the flat to get down to Port Moresby, and the Australians get reinforced by more AIF soldiers and some militia soldiers for that matter, and the tide has turned and they start to push the Japanese back all the way off the track and back to where they land, where they have a series of 3 big battles that finally get rid of the Japanese from the territory of Papua in that area, fighting on the Kokoda campaign.
Well, that first phase you described of the Japanese advance, that's what we're going to walk today, and we're going to break the Kokoda Track down into several sections, which we're going to cover. Just before we get started, this has a hallowed place in Australian military history in terms of the Anzac legend. Where do you see Kokoda fitting in the whole story of Australian military history?
For me personally, I think Kokoda represents the shift, if you will, of Australia fighting, battles and the wars, if you will, over, in far off distant lands, like obviously, in France, Belgium, in Turkey, in Gallipoli, fighting, I guess, for the British Empire, so to speak, where Kokoda represents, and Kokoda's not the only battle that this made up for this important time in Australia's history, is when we shifted from having to fight for our survival much closer to home. So as opposed to a far-off distant land, we're fighting not only much closer to home, but in the case of Kokoda, we're actually fighting on what was then, in essence, Australian soil.
Well, let's walk it, mate. Let's actually strap the boots on and put a pack on and get out there. Okay, so we're walking north to south. Where are we starting this trek, and how are we getting there?
So we're starting our trek really when we land on a domestic flight at a place called Popondetta, which is about 80 kilometres north of Kokoda village.
Okay, so we've flown to New Guinea and we've landed in Port Moresby and stayed there and got all our gear together. Now we're flying up. I should also, we're not going to go into too much details of the specific of how you do the trek, but obviously you do it in conjunction with local people. We should absolutely throw that in, that we wouldn't be doing any of this without the assistance of local people, would we?
No, we wouldn't. And, I always say that, my job really is to articulate the history, whereas the local Papuan porters and guides that come with us on the journey, and remembering it's their history as well, they're the real stars in this to help Australians or any tourist be able to navigate the jungles of New Guinea.
So, David, we've landed in Popondetta by light aircraft. What's the next phase of our adventure?
We meet our crew and we hop on the back of a PMV. PMV basically stands for public motor vehicle, but in essence, we're getting in the back of an Isuzu truck, which has two wooden seats running along the tray on the back. We've got a tarpaulin over the top of us around a frame, and we're setting off in the PMV, heading on a very bumpy ride to Kokoda.
How long does that take us?
It takes around about 4 hours.
And so once we arrive at Kokoda, this is obviously an iconic part of the story. Give us an overview of what happened at Kokoda, and then what we're going to see as we begin our trek from this point.
Well, along the way on the trip from Popondetta to Kokoda, we're stopping at Awala, which was the first place that the Papuan Infantry Battalion contacted the advancing Japanese, and the next major landmark we are visiting is the mighty Kamusi River at a place called Wairopi. This is a major water feature, and it features heavily in both the Japanese advance and the Australian advance. And then we keep going on our way to pass through two other areas, Oivi and Gorari, and both these places feature at the start and at the end of the campaign. In fact, one of the biggest battles fought towards the end, but at the start, the next contact which happened, and that was between the 39th Battalion soldiers and the Japanese. And then we get to Kokoda Station.
So tell us a bit about Kokoda today, and how does it compare to Kokoda in 1942?
Well, up until very recently, it was pretty much untouched, other than a few buildings and the four memorials which are on the plateau. It remained pretty much unchanged. Now there has been some construction, so there is some new modern buildings going up, which is doing what Kokoda in essence has been since even before the war, and that is that it's the administrative hub of that particular region. So it's now got some new buildings going in, but it still has the same, fall of ground, which looks down towards where the Japanese were advancing 80 years ago.
And once we get to Kokoda, are we setting ourselves up there? Are we heading straight out on the track? What are we doing next?
So when we're at Kokoda, what we do is we have the boys that are going to be on our trip get all the gear together. They get all the rations. They put it into areas of the types of food, like whether it be rice, whether it be the cooking oil and pots and pans and all that sort of stuff, and they divide it up to get into the porterage crew, if you will. And while that's going on, we're down at the Kokoda Plateau looking at the memorials, visiting the Bert Kienzl Museum, and really setting the scene for what's about to be in front of us over the next 8 or 9 days.
Well, tell us about those things. Tell us about the memorials we're looking at and the museum. And what are we experiencing?
So on the Kokoda Plateau itself, and you can imagine the Kokoda Plateau is only around about, I think it's 80 metres high or something. It's not a huge plateau, but it's on there. There are these wonderful memorials built out of large river stones, and they're painted white. They were put in the post-war years by Bert Kienzl. And he was, has been labelled the architect of Kokoda. He's the guy who lived in the territory before the war, and he organised all what we call the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, in the sense of all the carriers that worked for the Australians during the campaign. And in the post-war years, he put in these wonderful memorials. And in fact, one of the memorials has this big metal disc, and the disc has got it depicts a carrier crew carrying Australians on a stretcher, and Bert Kienzl actually thought that would, and he offered the idea up to the government that would be the stamp, if you will, in the medal to award the Papuan carriers. You also have a very unique memorial there. In fact, it's one of only 2 in the entire Kokoda Track, which commemorates the Japanese participation in the campaign. And looking at the memorial has written in Japanese on it, but it also has the barrel of a mountain gun, and that barrel was actually recovered by Bert Kienzl, but it has a story attached to it whereby the withdrawing Japanese at this time couldn't take the gun across the Kamusi River, so they buried it, and later on it's incorporated in this memorial. So the gun, if you will, has never left the battlefield. It's still there at Kokoda 80 years later.
Did you say there's also a museum there at Kokoda?
There is. There's a museum, and it's had over the years there has been several different variations of the museum, but basically there is quite a nice building there with a skylight coming down with all these interpretive panels and big photos that have blown up hanging down from the ceiling depicting scenes of the Kokoda campaign. And it also has some artifacts, if you will, some weapon systems that are off planes. You can actually see the 2 barrels of the Lewis guns, because the early soldiers that were facing the Japanese, the militia guys, were equipped with First World War weapons. So there's 2 Lewis gun barrels there. You'll find helmets, you'll find some bayonets, you'll find Japanese knee mortars, and of course, very interestingly, you'll find what's left of pack saddles, because the Japanese landed with a lot of horses to carry supplies, and they're still there, all in the museum. These things haven't left the battlefield. They're still pretty much very close to where they were left behind.
Just on that subject, David, I haven't done Kokoda myself, but I've spent a lot of time in the Solomon Islands, and artefacts from the fighting are part and parcel of the experience of visiting those battlefields. Is it the same at Kokoda? Are you finding during the trek relics and tangible reminders of the fighting?
All the time. It's almost like that the jungle just reveals these lost long artifacts constantly. Every time I walk Kokoda, you'll find artifacts that you didn't see last time, and they come from a variety of things. One, they've come out of the bush, literally. The jungle regurgitates it, if you will, the stuff that's buried under the ground. But more importantly, you also have you have local people who are subsistent farmers. So a lot of the time they're burning the foliage, and they're ploughing their fields and growing their crops. And as they do that in that process, I guess you could liken it a little bit to the iron harvest on the Western Front, except it's not done with heavy mechanical machinery. It's people, slashing, burning, cultivating by hand. And of course, as they do that, they find things like grenades, they find things like bullets or bullet casings, they find anything from collars off the mortar tubes to even Bren guns and Japanese woodpecker machine guns. All these things are usually found by the local people, and they put them in a pile, and they put them in what they, I guess, loosely call a museum. A lot of the people along the track would have their own little collection where they, you pay a small fee and you can go and view all these artifacts that have come out of the jungle.
Just extraordinary, mate. And before we continue on the trek, is there anything else to see at Kokoda? I mean, the airstrip is a famous part of the history, and that still remains at Kokoda, doesn't it?
It does indeed, and yes, it is worth noting because, as I said, the plateau is not that high, relatively speaking. For a plateau, it's quite low, but it is a high ground in that area. Of course, you've got this big mountain range behind you, but looking down off one side of the plateau, you can see the Kokoda airstrip, and it's still a grass strip, and although it's been widened and lengthened, it's pretty much in the exact same spot as what it was during the war. In fact, there's a wonderful wartime photo of the strip where you can see the plateau and the airstrip. And if you looked at a modern day photo, other than a few buildings and the airstrip's been lengthened, it's not really all that different. In fact, the foliage, the kunai grass growing around it, the tracks that disappear off into the Owen Stanley mountain range are pretty much still there. And, it's very, very close to how it was 80 years ago.
And that was a real lifeline for the Allies during the war, wasn't it? When Kokoda was in Allied hands, being able to have an airstrip in the heart of the battlefield was essential for the fighting, wasn't it?
Well, yes, and the first two battles of Kokoda really was a fight to control the Kokoda airstrip, and that's why Kokoda is, I guess the Kokoda campaign gets its name from that, because without Kokoda being the main centre with the airstrip, it could have very well been called the Oivi campaign, if you like, which is the village that we would have come through on our way into Kokoda from coming north-south. But, Kokoda, as I said, gives its name to it, but it has the airstrip. It's the seat of the government, administration in that region at the time. And it is, as I said, fought over twice on the Japanese advance. So it has not only gives its name, but it is strategically important to both sides.
So we've explored Kokoda, David, and seen all the sites there. Now we're going to begin trekking properly. Just describe, when we say walking the Kokoda Track at this stage, what are we seeing? What do we feel? Just describe the scene for us as we first set out on the track.
Well, when we first set out from Kokoda, the most noticeable thing, other than the humidity, the smells, there'd be people slashing and burning to grow their gardens. There'd be the smell of cooking. There'd be all those sorts of overload of your senses happening. But the big thing that you couldn't help but notice is the towering mountains of the Owen Stanleys that are, completely looking down on you. And it's almost a false sense of walking when you leave Kokoda, because you're walking along what they call the tractor trail. And this is a trail that you could drive a four-wheel drive. So it's like a fire trail here in Australia. And you start to walk along that at the base of the Owen Stanleys. And it goes for several hours. And you pass through some small villages. You pass through the village of Cavello and you pass through the village of Hoy. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, the tractor trail disappears. You're on single track and you're faced with a big mountain that you're climbing up. So it's almost, for the first couple of hours of Kokoda, you go, I'm comfortable. This isn't too bad after all. And then bang, it hits you.
And how do people go at that stage, that first height? Because I know it's a succession of going up and up and up and then down and down and down. How does that first height affect people?
Well, all of a sudden the reality kicks in, because from going along, talking to one another, telling jokes, sometimes people flinging mud at one another, that, being jovial as we can be, all of a sudden they're out of breath. So you can't be telling jokes, you can't be skylarking. You are head down, bum up, puffing and panting, sweating, getting yourself going and getting your engine firing on all cylinders to try and climb up the hill. And most people realise, hang on a second, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. We are on the Kokoda Track, and we mean business, and the track means business. And a lot of people would really get this sense of, okay, we're in it now. And as I said, after driving from Popondetta, getting to Kokoda, looking around, very slow start, then walking along a relatively flat fire trail, and it just disappearing behind you, and then bang, straight up that mountain. And you only have to look at a person's face to realise that, hey, we're in it now. This is what it must have felt like for young Australian soldiers who had otherwise not experienced this type of walking before.
Going back to 1942, did the Japanese realise what they were getting themselves in for? Was this a well-planned campaign from the Japanese perspective? Did they have maps? Had they spoken to local people to know what they were going to face? Or were they taken by surprise by the harshness of the terrain?
I think to really answer that question, I guess the first thing is, did the Japanese know They certainly did. They had reconnaissance. They had reconnaissance going back before the war, where Port Moresby was, and that there was this mountain range. They were also aided by European, I guess, spy, for want of a different term, had given them information, because you have to understand that area around Kokoda in the pre-war years. A lot of people had come to find gold. That's the Yorta Valley, and the Yorta Valley was a place that people would go off to go, like they would in a lot of other places in New Guinea, looking for gold. So the Japanese actually had brought Tolai, so that's the native population of Rabaul, because they'd sailed down from Rabaul, the capital of East New Britain, an island above mainland PNG, and they had brought, I guess, local Tolai people who were able to then communicate with the Orokaiva people who were in that part of the world, plus they had some European assistance. So they knew that there was a mountain range. I think it would also be safe to say, though, that whilst they knew about this major, you couldn't miss it. Even to fly over it, you couldn't miss that there was this huge geographical feature in your way. I think what surprised both sides is that it was just getting into that type of warfare in that terrain would bog you down, and that's what happened to both sides. They got bogged down, and the third character in this is, not, you've got the Japanese, you've got the Australians, and you've got the Papuans and the natives that are involved in the campaign, but the other opponent, if you will, because there's an opponent on both sides, it's your friend and it's your enemy, and that's the mighty Owen Stanleys of the Kokoda Track. It's just an enormous mountain range that, both sides are familiar with it, but they don't necessarily realise that the longer you spend in it, the harder your campaign is going to be.
Well, without wandering too far off track, quite literally and figuratively, again, the parallels with Gallipoli. It's really the same story for the Second World War, isn't it? It's one of the early campaigns. I mean, it's not the first campaign of the Second World War for Australians, but it's an early campaign. We've got this idea of this sort of hurried, urgent response to a threat. And then we've got this idea that the terrain is as much an enemy as the literal enemy you are fighting. So there are so many parallels with Gallipoli. So I can see why it sits prominently in the Anzac story.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
When it comes to weight loss, no two people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Hi, who here loves when their nails are perfectly done? Me. I'm Sarah Gibson-Tuttle, and I started Olive in June because, let's be real, we all deserve to have gorgeous nails, but who wants to spend a fortune or half their day at the salon? And that's why I created the Mani system, so you can have that salon-perfect manicure right at home. And guess what? The best part? Each mani only costs $2. Yep, you heard me, $2. No more $30, $40, $50 salon trips that eat up your day. Now you can paint your nails whenever you want, wherever you want. And trust me, you're going to be obsessed with your nails, and everyone is going to ask you, where did you get your nails done? And here's a little something extra. Head over to oliveandjune.com and get 20% off your first Mani system with code PERFECTMANI20 at oliveandjune.com/PERFECTMANI20. That's code PERFECTMANI20 for 20% off at oliveandjune.com/PERFECTMANI20. You're all set for a nail glow up. Let's get those nails looking fabulous, shall we?
Yeah, we've got this major geographical feature. We have hurried attempt to send our soldiers to meet this enemy, and we also have the story playing out where you've got the underdog, I guess, fighting what certainly up until that point in the Second World War, undefeated. I mean, the Japanese had not been defeated on land at this point, and the first guys that are going up against a battle experienced army are militia soldiers who have not yet seen fighting. Some of their officers and senior NCOs had only a very small percent had seen fighting in the First World War. Another group had been reinforced that had little experience fighting either at the fall of Rabaul or in the Middle East. But for the most part, the soldiers that first faced the Japanese in the Owen Stanleys were young militia soldiers who had only done their training. They'd never seen combat in their life. And in fact, they didn't expect to see combat in the territory of Papua at that stage.
Just extraordinary, is it? You can see why it's such a heroic story. Well, speaking of heroics, we're in the thick of it now, tracking along. So just describe to us as we're going along from Kokoda, what's the next major site we're going to come to on the track?
The next major site we're going to come to is a place called Stebnicki. And Stebnicki is interesting, both from the campaign's point of view and both from you as someone undertaking the pilgrimage, because when you get to Stebnicki, you appreciate we've walked along, we've left Kokoda now, we've started to get into the guts of walking, and the next big break where you're going to sit down and have an extended stay is this campsite of Stebnicki. And Stebnicki, when you get there, you turn around, you look down, and guess what you can see? You can see Kokoda Plateau, and you can see the Kokoda airstrip, and it's very easy to put in perspective exactly what the Australians were doing. And the Australians, who had fought a battle at Kokoda to begin with, withdrew back up to Stebnicki, the high ground. They can look back on Kokoda, and then they go back down and retake Kokoda, and they hold Kokoda for a couple of days. And if you're a trekker, you've just busted your guts to get up there, you're having this extended break, and all of a sudden you turn around and you look down and you go, hang on, have I just really come this far? And it all starts to put in perspective. You understand the relationship between the high ground and the mountains, looking down to the low ground where your enemy may be.
And what can we see at Stebnicki today?
At Stebnicki today, there's a couple of guest houses. These are huts made out of local bush materials, if you will. Nice, clear, open spaces. There's actually a beautiful, picturesque part of the track. It's got just around the corner from the huts, there's this water pipe that comes out with this beautiful, fresh, clear water that everyone fills their water bottles up with. But there's not a lot to see there in relation to the wartime Stebnicki, because wartime Stebnicki actually sits just above where current day Stebnicki is. Because you have to imagine that a lot of the family groups that live on this land, because they're subsistence farming, their villages, their huts, if you will, over time move around in different spots within their land as they cultivate and as they grow their gardens. So, but if you're there and you're looking down at Kokoda, you're pretty much seeing a very similar scene to what an Australian soldier would have seen 80 years ago when they're looking back down on where the Japanese are coming in hot pursuit behind you.
When you arrive in these villages, David, what's the reception like from the local people?
The first thing you notice is the kids. Little kids will come running out with big smiles on their face. They usually have a bush knife or a stick or something that they've been using in the garden in their hand, but they come running out and they greet you. It's like this warm, welcoming, who isn't going to get feel a sense of happiness and joy when a whole group of happy, smiling kids come running out to you. And, more times than not, someone in the group will pull out a tennis ball, they'll pull out a bag of lollies, they'll pull out some pens and pencils or something and give to the kids. And you just see, you didn't think their faces could get a bigger smile or light up anymore, but they just are overwhelmed by it, and they're just so excited to see you. And I guess for the kids growing up in the villages, when they see us trekkers come through, they know, hey, there might be a treat or something special there, and they'll start having a game. And especially if somebody's got a ball, you'll start throwing the tennis ball to the kids, and they'll all laugh and they'll all giggle and they'll run around, and it's just it's amazing experience to see that.
It must be a great feeling after the perils of trekking for several hours. People must respond very strongly to that.
It almost puts you into a false sense of, I've forgotten about the walking. It fades away, and you're living in the moment. And in fact, I think it highlights one of the biggest things about taking this particular pilgrimage is that when you have moments like that, the hardships melt away, and you are living in the moment. We tend not to live in the moment so much in today's society, but when you're in places like Kokoda and walking on those battlefields that are combined with a developing country, have their population in there who don't have TV, don't have all the distractions that we have of the modern world, as I said, you are simply left with living in the moment, which is a tremendous feeling.
Just amazing, mate. And are we overnighting at Stebnicki, or are we just staying there for a break?
Well, it's an interesting point. We can overnight here at Stebnicki, but if you're feeling like you can dig a little deeper, then we can do another 4-hour-odd stint climbing up some very steep hills until we get to the village of Isarava.
Well, let's do that now. Describe that walk for us. Well, I think we're feeling pretty hardy so far on our virtual trek. So let's say goodbye to the local people of Stebnicki and push on. Indeed, and by now I would suggest we've all got our rhythm. We've all started to find our pace, and usually the group shakes out. In fact, people that you started walking with along the tractor trail may not be next to you. They might be behind you, or they might be in front of you, and you start walking along at your own pace, and which is indeed what you have to do. So leaving Stebnicki behind us, as I said, there's that magnificent water pipe that has the crystal clear water coming through it. You can't help but take a drink or fill up your bottle. And then you're walking through, you're still in the mountains, you're still climbing, but there's these wonderful choco fields. So choco, I guess everyone knows what a choco is, but instead of the actual fruit of the choco, they use the small baby shoots of the choco to make green spinach. And in fact, we will have that for dinner when we get to our night camp, where they'll be part of the meal. But there's these wonderful choco fields, and you sort of cut through them, and you've got all trees around you, but the canopy is open to allow these crop to grow. And as you're walking along, you're walking under underfoot is these grey, hard sort of stones. Careful not to trip on them, but you make your way through the choco with beautiful butterflies, and if you're lucky, some of the choco will have flowers on. They have these beautiful bell-type yellow flowers, and as we go, of course, more distractions, hopefully to take the mind off walking and perspiring and doing all that. But then you'll be broken by crossing a fairly, not a wide creek, but fast-flowing enough creek over a couple of log bridges, and then having these two big climbs to get you up, right up into the mountain proper now, as we make our way into the Isarava village. And what were the Australians experiencing as they fell back across this ground in 1942?
I would say that the Australians that were withdrawing from Kokoda or withdrawing from Stebnicki, so after the first two battles of Kokoda, and they know that they have to withdraw back. In fact, the commander of the 39th Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Honor, had already identified the high ground of Isarava as being a place to dig in. And the accounts that I've read, the veterans that I've spoken to who left Kokoda in a hurry, they could see this, or they could see the smoke. In places you could still sort of see a glimpse of Kokoda and the hue of the burning supplies and that they've destroyed to deny the Japanese as they make their way up into the jungles to dig in. So they would have experienced a hurried march. I think the motivation of the Japanese and hot pursuit behind you would have been enough to get you up that up the hill. And of course, in 1942, you weren't doing it with wonderful padded soled shoes and all the modern trekking equipment. You had hard leather boots, and you had webbing backpacks that the sweat and the moisture of the jungle would have only contributed to it running and rubbing on your skin and chafing you. And I think it would have been a combination of being deprived of the niceties of life, but also the sense of urgency that you need to hightail it to get to the high ground to save yourself.
David, just at this point, I think it would be a good idea to give us a concept of what does it mean fighting withdrawal? What is actually happening from a battle point of view as the Australians are pulling back with the Japanese relentlessly pressing forward?
Well, in this case, the fighting withdrawal really means that the Australians, as I said, have had 2 battles at Kokoda, which although they held on, they weren't able to hold on long enough, and they have to withdraw back as they fight to save themselves, if you will, to withdraw back and to regain the initiative. And that is to, of course, be on the high ground. If you are on the high ground, you can dominate your enemy. It's pretty easy to contemplate that the fact that if you're on the high ground, your enemy's below you, then you've got an advantage. So Stebnicki, as we said before, overlooking Kokoda, high ground, but not a huge spot to be able to dig in and hold a battle. And as I said, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Honor, who came to take over command of the 39th Battalion, who are the guys at this point in time, the ones really fighting the Japanese, they've gone up to a much wider area, being Isarava, which is higher, wider, easier to defend. So a fighting withdrawal means that they're basically having a go at the enemy, small skirmishing with the enemy in this case, withdrawing back, not so much because they're just running away, but they are making a concerted attempt to still take the fight to the enemy, but they're doing it on a ground of their choosing.
So we're trekking on further, David. We've left Stebnicki behind us, and now we're approaching probably one of the most significant battlefields, if not the most significant battlefield on the entire track. It's Isarava. So tell us about the approach. Tell us about this significant part of the battlefield.
Well, the first thing as we move into the to Isarava is that you're pretty much under canopy. The jungle is quite thick in places. There's a creek that the locals call Blood Creek, and you cross that, and you've got a bit of a climb until you punch your way through the foliage, if you will, and then you come to this wonderful cleared space, which actually looks like it looks like going into a parkland here in Australia. It's just very well maintained. It is an anomaly. All of a sudden, there's an oasis, if you will, in the jungle. And the first thing that you notice when you go in there is that, other than how well maintained it is, but you see these 4 granite pillars sticking up. They're almost like images of Stonehenge, images of Newgrange. If you've ever been to the Bruneiboyne cultural area in Ireland, these almost monolithic works of commemoration, because that's what they are. All of those things that are in the part of the human condition that we do to make significant times in history. We mark them, and these granite pillars that stick up out of the ground, and behind them you have the parting in the mountains, which looks back down towards Kokoda. The scene on itself, if it was not even connected to an Australian battlefield, it would be enough for people to say, wow, this is magnificent. But when you think that you're standing there on an Australian battlefield with this magnificent monument, in fact, I've been to many battlefields around the world, but nothing comes close to standing there in the open area of the jungle, looking down towards Kokoda, seeing these 4 big granite pillars sticking out. And they're the pillars, of course, that have the words endurance, courage, mateship, and sacrifice on them. So it's a humbling experience for anybody that comes across that scene.
And tell us what happened at the Battle of Isarava in 1942.
So the Battle of Isarava, as I said before, as the Australians had made their fighting withdrawal back after the first 2 battles of Kokoda, the Battle of Stebnicki, they get there and they dig in. And these young militiamen, members of the 39th Battalion, mainly they were from Victoria, they dig in and they are waiting for 2 things to happen. they're either waiting for the Japanese to come and overrun them, or they're waiting for the AIF. So these are men of the 2nd 14th Battalion and the 2nd 16th Battalion. They're waiting for them, who have by this stage are marching, coming from the opposite direction, marching from the Port Moresby end to reach them. After the Australians lose the airstrip, they can't reinforce by air anymore. All man and material have to be marched in. And of course, Issaraba's only a day's walk out of Kokoda, so they're still very close to the Kokoda end. The rest of the guys have had to go, a 5-6 days march to get to them. So as I said, Issaraba, in the spot where the memorial is, there was literally Australians digging in across from where the memorial is up into the other side of the mountain, waiting for those two things to happen. Which one happens first? Either the Japanese come and overrun them, and at this stage in the campaign, they could have easily done that. They had the numbers to do that, or they're waiting for the men of the AIF to come and join them. And it is, in fact, in Australian history, it's the first time that I know of when the militia and the AIF stood shoulder to shoulder against an enemy.
So I'm assuming from that the second scenario played out, that the AIF men got there in time. Tell us about the battle as it unfolded.
Yeah, so indeed, after the 39th dig in, by now the Japanese are preparing for their attack, but you're right, the AIF do get there. They do reinforce them. At first they actually said to the 39th that you can be taken out of battle, but because the 39th, and I must say, I should also add, they had elements over on the other side of the 53rd Battalion, which was a sister militia battalion of the 39th. These guys, were said, by the AIF, you're out of battle now. We're here to take over. But of course, men like Ralph Honor knew that they were going up against a formidable enemy, an enemy that's just, chased the Australians out of Kokoda twice. And he said, no, we're happy. We're going to stay here and we're going to fight alongside you. So, and that's what they did. They took a gallant stand. So men of the 39th and the 2nd 14th and the 2nd 16th, they took a gallant stand against that Japanese, who at this stage had established their beachheads where they came from on the north coast of Papua, and they had, as I said, captured Kokoda and its airfield, and they'd got their they've got their organisation together, if you will, to start the main push, and that main push is to push the Australians off Kokoda and march on Port Moresby. So a lot of things are going on, but for the Australians that are dug in at Issaraba, this is the stand. This is the place with the AIF and the militia to try and stop the Japanese in their tracks.
So there was a pretty big battle here, and eventually it resulted in the Aussies being, again, withdrawing under the face of heavy Japanese pressure. I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, because when we talk about history, we should always keep asking questions and try to paint an accurate picture. In recent years, so Issaraba was always painted as this magnificent stand where they held off, the Australians were greatly outnumbered, but they managed to hold off the Japanese, long enough to cause some grievous losses, and then the Australians pulled back, keeping touch with the Japanese all the way. Some historians in recent years have looked at the records, particularly the Japanese records, and have reevaluated the battle somewhat. Not the importance of the battle, but perhaps the tactics that were employed, and have suggested that the Japanese probably didn't outnumber the Australians as much as we thought, and that the fact that the Australians were allowed to withdraw was due to tactical mistakes by the Japanese. David, where do you stand on this, this reassessment of the Battle of Issaraba?
I definitely think that the work that has gone into understanding the Australian and the Japanese dispositions and their numbers, I'd say that we've got a greater understanding of that now. And I guess the story is not as plain to say that, the Australians were outnumbered by this overwhelming force, because we now know that we actually have records which shows the amount of Japanese there and the amount of Australians there. But you're right. If the battle had been so clear-cut, as legend put it, the Australians, in essence, would have not been able to withdraw. They would have. That's where it would have ended. In fact, there's no question that the Australians wouldn't have been able to then fight their next big battle, which we'll come to in a later episode, which is the Battle of Brigade Hill. But they were able to, not allowed, I don't think allowed is the right word, but rather they were able to manoeuvre themselves to be able to continue this fighting withdrawal. I think it's also fair to say that from the Japanese point of view, going back to what I said earlier about this other character, the mountains there, it probably wasn't as easily won on their hand, because they have to come up against this huge feature, which is the Owen Stanley Ranges. And when you're at Isarava, if we're picturing ourselves there looking at the memorial now where the battle unfolded, you can see why it is very difficult if you were the enemy attacking a dug-in group of soldiers who were trying to fight you off. You're literally coming up, and the Japanese are on the other side of the valley, on the other side of the mountain there. You're literally coming up this very steep incline with very close country, very close jungle. You can't really see too far in front of you. Remember, if you were standing there now, you're looking at a cleared set of land that's been turned into a memorial, but it wasn't like that in its day. It was, whilst there was a clearing where the village was, it was much more heavily wooded, more jungle. You wouldn't have known exactly where your enemy is. Either side wouldn't have known where they were, and there would have been confusion, and there certainly would have been this extra element where you can't maneuver as easily as what you could have, or for the Japanese in the point in case what they have done in prior campaigns that they'd done before getting to Isarava. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say that it isn't exactly how legend had played it out, but nonetheless, we can't diminish the Australians knowing that the battle was going to be lost, that they managed to manoeuvre enough to be able to continue the fighting withdrawing, which, as we'll see later, played to the Australian advantage.
So, fast forwarding back to modern times, we've trekked in, we've seen the memorial. What else are we doing at Isarava? Is this our first overnight stop?
Yes. On the trip that you and I are on right now, Matt, this is our first afternoon. We've had a huge day coming up from Kokoda through Stebnicki, having lunch on the way, of course, going through those choco fields and then coming to the beautiful memorial of Isarava. And in this case in point, we've done a battlefield tour of the battlefield of Isarava, and we've camped there. But we're going to do something very, very special. And there's only a couple of points on the track where we do this. One is Brigade Hill and one is Isarava, and that is that regardless of whether it's Anzac Day or not, we're going to wake up in the morning, we're going to gather around those four pillars, and we're going to have a solemn service of remembrance to commemorate those that paid the ultimate sacrifice in the Battle of Isarava.
Must be an absolutely extraordinary experience. I tell you what, Dave, we've packed a lot into our first day. I mean, as I said, I've never done Kokoda, but so I'm with our listeners, I'm really enjoying this adventure as it unfolds. And geez, we've packed in a lot for our first day.
I can tell you, Matt, unlike some other battlefields that I've gone to, we have literally packed a heap in there. You've all of a sudden been, thrusted into puffing and panning and dragging yourself up a mountain after you've walked along the fire trail. You've had sensory overload with all the sights and smells and sounds of the jungle. You've bonded with your porter by now, so whoever's walking alongside you, one of the local fellows, you've hopefully spoken to them, they've opened up to you, they've told them a bit about their lives, so you've tried to pack all that into your memory. And also, along the way, you've heard these stories unfold of Australian service and sacrifice, and now you've come to this huge clearing in the mountains, looking back down from once you walked, and you're trying to, picture in your mind the events that unfolded in August of 1942 when the Battle of Isarava happened. And now you're going to, all of a sudden, you're exhausted, you've had a sleep, but you're going to get up, and based with the knowledge that you have heard over the last, best part of 24 hours, you're going to be able to stand in silence and remember those guys. It's an amazing experience, and as you said, all packed into 24 hours.
Sounds absolutely extraordinary. And I should say, for the rest of this podcast, we're not going to do day by day. It's not going to be a nine episode podcast. We are going to start compacting it a little bit, because obviously first day is very, very important. Just at this point, David, just so we're aware, give us a feeling of what it's like at the end of a day when you arrive at a campsite, what we do as trekkers at the end of the day.
Well, at the end of the day, the first thing, especially if you're a smart trekker, and I would have already told you this beforehand, is that you want to do some personal admin. And that means, your tent will be set up. You want to unpack your bag. You want to get out of those trekking clothes, which you're going to wear again the next day. But for the most part, you're going to get out of those, have a rest from them, get out of your boots. Very important. Get out of your boots, put on, thongs or Crocs or those sorts of things. And of course, have a shower, have a tub, have a wash at Isarava at the campsite there. There's a There are actually shower heads there, but obviously don't expect hot water. It's just the pipe coming from a fast-flowing creek. But you get in there, get yourself cleaned up, get into your clothes for the evening, and hopefully as you decide to go back towards your tent, slipping in your thongs on the moist grass, you'll be met with a big bowl of popcorn and sit down and finally be able to relax and talk to your fellow trekkers about the day that's just unfolded. And you're right, this part of the trek, we've spent a bit of time, Kokoda up to Sarava, but because the way that we're walking, north-south, a lot of things happen in this particular area, and as we said, huge amount to take in, huge amount. I don't know anyone that's done it that hasn't had this enormous sense of wow, like what just happened? I just went through the spin dry cycle on the washing machine, and here I am. Wow, look at all this that we've just taken in today. It's almost as I said, overwhelming sensation.
Well, as we know, an army marches on its stomach, and so does a trekking group. What are we having for dinner?
Well, I actually quite like the evening meals, and the reason I do is because I've got to give a shout out to a chap, Gibes, who is just an amazing fellow when it comes to cooking. And tonight, I'm suggesting that we're going to have Gibes chicken stew. Obviously, if you don't eat chicken, there could be something else, but Gibes chicken stew is amazing. Obviously, one of the staple parts of your meal at night is going to be rice, because it's a staple part of the diet that they supplement in PNG, but we have rice. So imagine a big bowl of freshly cooked rice, and then you've got Gibes chicken stew, which we have what they call backcountry meals, freeze-dried chicken. It's actually a product made in New Zealand. The big industrial-sized bags of the dehydrated chicken, because obviously you can't carry fresh meat in the jungle. But that's only one ingredient to it. The rest of the ingredients is wonderful. Remember the choco fields that we just walked through? You're going to have the baby choco shoots in there. A lot of the stuff that they grow in the gardens up there consists of varieties of potatoes, so sweet potato. So Gibes would have already got that during the day. He's put that in there. He's made this wonderful stew with it all, and it's warm, it's hot, it's delicious, and you deserve it because you've just climbed all the way from Kokoda up to Sarava.
Are we sitting around a campfire, David, or what's the setup?
I'm glad you bring that up, because that is also one of my favourite parts of the evening, because you're indeed correct. We're sitting around, the jungle would have cooled, so everyone thinks, we're in the tropics, it must be hot. Yeah, it is hot, especially in the closer down where Kokoda and different parts of the trek, it'll be at different temperature zones. But in the evening, it doesn't take long for the temperature to drop and you too to drop, and it's nice, your temperature to drop, so it's nice to sit around after you shower around the campfire and enjoy your meal and enjoy my pleasure, which is to sit there and do a campfire yarn. And usually the talk is about not just what you've done that day and what's going on back home and all that sort of stuff, but people often turn their attention to what it must have been like to be, what were the soldiers talking about 80 years ago? What was in their minds? What would they have thought? You're thinking about what's going on at home, but imagine what they would have thought was going on back in their homes in this case Victoria or Sydney or places like that. What was going on? They would have done a very similar thing. So it really brings out that almost lost part of Australia, and that is the campfire yarn, and I love it. It's fantastic.
Well, David, it's been absolutely extraordinary. I think that's a good spot to end it there, and we can pick this up in our next episode and carry on the trek. As I said, the first day we do a lot, so we've only done one day of our 9-day adventure. We're going to compact it a little more into only a couple of other episodes so that we can actually get the whole thing done. But it's been really extraordinary, mate. And as I said, not having done it, I will absolutely do it in the future with you. But not having done it, I've enjoyed this journey as much as I'm sure our listeners are, because it's just. And the thing about this that I've only just realised as we're doing it is there's been so much written about Kokoda and so much said about it and documentaries and all sorts of things, but we're bringing it to life here, the feelings, experiences, the sights, the sounds, the smells. What a wonderful way it is to study Kokoda by doing it in this virtual sense. So, mate, it's been extraordinary. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks to you, man. It's been wonderful.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Someone asked me the other day, do you know how many devices the average home has connected to their Wi-Fi network? Here's a hint. It's a lot. Xfinity knows this number is growing by the year. That's why they engineered their gateways to handle hundreds of connected devices, all to keep us connected to the good stuff, like streaming, gaming, interneting, and more. Visit Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit a store to switch today. Xfinity. Bring on the good stuff. Restrictions apply. Not available in all areas.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.